Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Katz Chats. I'm your host, Steve Katz. I'm the Alternative Delivery Director for Kiewit, and this is a podcast that's everything to do about transportation. Really excited about today's guest, Kenn Sullivan here. He's a professor of Arizona State University and a managing partner at Simplar. Let's get started. Kenn, now you and I have the benefit of knowing each other. We sat on a panel I moderated and you were on the panel. Great conversation at WashTow this year, and there was a ton of buzz. And I'm excited to have you here. I think there's a lot of detailed conversation, and then we can add on to that panel discussion that we had in Hawaii a couple months ago. But for everybody that's listening, can you just kind of give us and maybe my eighth grade self an understanding of what you do on the regular?
Besides husband and father, so I do research, try to figure stuff out, make things better in all different aspects of procurement, product delivery, team optimization, organizational behavior, transformation, certain things in technology we do as well. And then I teach both college age and also professionals and provide advising. And then we do consulting. So we help people actually get better. So we assist, train, do it for them in all different aspects of product delivery, but mainly in procurement, product delivery, and then in the organizational change and performance measurement aspects.
Great. So let's really hone in here on procurement, because that's something that we keep coming back to in these podcasts, is that there's this renaissance that we're talking about, this collaborative delivery, progressive design build, CM at risk, CMGC, general contracting. But there's a huge shift there. And I think you've been a part of a lot of these from an owner's side as well as from a contractor side. But the honeymoon seems to be over, right? So now we're starting to be able to see and look at the performance of these. And I've been hearing some troubling information or rumors that there's more projects that are getting off-ramped, and there's a concern over budgets. And I'm from California, as you know, and there was a surplus not too long ago, and now there's a deficit. And so my question to you is how is that impacting the owners in this environment, and how do you see that shifting, and is there going to be a shift from the collaborative delivery model space?
So I'll touch on procurement aspects of that first. So from the procurement perspective, sometimes that word's not well defined inside organizations, what that means and what it doesn't mean. But from an aspect of competing vendors that want the job, selecting them, and then contracting them, those are three distinct aspects. One thing we see a lot that client organizations will do is they don't distinguish between the selection process they're going to use, the mechanisms for competing the vendors or the design build teams or whatever it may be, the contract structure they're going to use, and the delivery mechanism. Those are all three distinct decisions. So a lot of times they're lumped together. So we may say a contract is low bid, but within that we mean it's lump sum. Low bid's a procurement method, the cheapest one wins. And we'll say it's design, bid, build, traditional delivery, 100% design, then it's fully. So those are three distinct things. You can have different contracts, different delivery methods, and different procurement processes or selection methods, and you can mix and match those. So you get into some of the alternative delivery spaces, you get into design, build, you start to see where that begins to get confused on the best ways to do that, and then in progressive design, build. And so sometimes we will think, well, I'm going to do progressive design build, which is a delivery type. But then if you don't match it to the right contract structure and the way you get to that contract and negotiate that contract and have the right selection process to complement the advantages of progressive design build delivery structure, you can get yourself into some trouble. And so, just having the right selection methodology in a progressive design build or a CM at risk sets you up for the right type of contract negotiations and contract structure. And then how you actually structure that contract, mainly the commercial terms, whether it's a lump sum or it's a GMP or a phased GMP, different ways you can do that. And then you get into, so that delivery system decision usually comes first. And you have to pick what you're going to do like that. And sometimes it's regulated by law. You only have so many options. In terms of what do I kind of see happening, there's lots of challenges. Honeymoon's definitely over. The Renaissance honeymoon is over.
Yes.
The last downturn in 06, we were having a significant and rapid increase in the use of alternative delivery methods. There are a lot of new legislation in place in some of the straggler states. So you're seeing more public agencies be able to use CM at risk and design build back in the early 2000s. And then we hit 06, 07, 08, things slowed down. And then there was a massive shift back to low bid procurement in a lump sum design bid build world. Because they were getting, good prices. People are trying to maintain cash flow. So hopefully it doesn't happen again, but that's definitely a danger. If things do slow down, it's the absolute best time for a client who knows what they're doing to run alternative delivery the right way. I mean, it should be a boom for progressive design build in a down market, the way to take advantage of it. But yeah, if it's not done properly, if the procurement's not set up correctly, you can get yourself into some expectation problems in terms of what it can and can't do, right? Like how magical a silver bullet it is. And then you have those missed expectations, which leads to, we thought we were going to get something else than we're getting.
Right.
And the vendors are like, well, this is the world we live in.
Right.
And you have this frustration, but most of that frustration could be based upon bad expectations. It could be around the budget, right? So you have deficits, right? So we built a budget. We thought we escalated it properly. We have some type of independent cost estimation happening. And as we get closer to the reality of what this is going to cost, we feel, as a client, may feel shocked, right? How expensive it is. And they're like, oh, I thought cost leveled out. Like, well, there's some delays in cost and the bidding and budgeting, all those different things that happen. So
we had a quick conversation before we started here. Can you kind of go, it was really interesting to hear about the trailing cost aspects of it. If you could talk a little bit about that.
So we've been tracking this. I do some economic stuff, mainly in the built environment space. And so the way a lot of times you look at cost escalation is based upon producer price index, PPI, which comes from the government. And it's a lagging data. It'll say it's July, but it's usually lagged off of that. And the way that works is it escalates faster than bid prices can keep up. And that's just reflected in some of the nature of your average contract duration. So your average contract duration in construction is going to be 18 to 24, 36 months. You have some basic blocks of time. So this trend has happened, probably 7-8 times since the 70s, where you have cost escalation. So, and the bid prices don't keep up. So you can have cost escalation, but programmatically, a buying organization, a client organization won't actually see the true impacts of that cost escalation because it trails. So we were seeing cost escalations of 20, 30% across a 12-month timeline in certain cost categories. But bid prices only crept up 4 or 5%. I've got a great curve on this. I should have brought a slide, but it kind of makes like an avocado shape.
Okay.
And so now, as we're in the current market we're in, as of August 2023, producer price index are still going up, but they're leveling off.
Okay.
Right? It's not this rapid, 5-10% a year pace that was going. But the actual costs that are going back to contracts, these things are escalating at a faster rate than they were a year ago. So they've converged as of about 2 months ago. And then if historical trends repeat, you will see a faster escalation or acceleration of bid prices and cost actual input to the PPI. So you're going to see this divergence where instead of the PPI outpacing the bid cost,
Okay.
you're going to see bid cost outpace PPI. So why are bid costs going up faster than the cost of concrete?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. Well, because it trails 18 to 24 months.
Right.
So it'll take 2 years, on average, it takes 2 years to flip back over. AGC, Kenn Sullivan, their chief economist, he has a wonderful curve, and he's tracked this for a long time. And it's really neat how it happens, but he's got it leveled out where it's like, when do PPIs exceed bid price, and when does bid price exceed PPI? And they mirror each other. It's almost freaky how perfect the ups and downs are.
Always.
So you just flip it.
Yeah.
And so everything we saw of PPI, it's going to level off, and then we've caught up with the actual cost to do the work.
Right.
And that's just materials. That's not including labor. We've not had this level of, inflation, wage rate growth in decades.
Oh, yeah.
How fast that's happening.
Right.
And construction's significantly less than the average U.S. cost in terms of salary growth and wage growth.
Right.
We're trailing that by a couple percentage points on average the last year.
Right.
So if I'm a client, I would expect to actually see the cost of my construction to continue to rise at a faster clip, or the same clip, maybe slightly slower than it was, but much faster than you may see on the news.
Right.
Inflation rates or producer price index rates going up.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go back real quick when you were talking about the 3 elements and carving it up. Have you looked at any lessons learned from projects or off-ramp projects or anything like that? Is there a consistency of which one of those elements are being the challenge or the problem versus others, or is it a mixed bag of results?
So it's complex. It's not a linear relationship between everything. So sequentially, usually you're picking the delivery system first. And a lot of times that's based upon a few people's excitement levels or norms based upon what you've done in the past. Some organizations have a pretty good way of using the project criteria to define what the delivery method should be. The best way to do it is there are some project factors that play into which delivery method would be appropriate, always within whatever your regulatory and cultural constraints are as an organization. The largest factor nowadays in terms of selection is really the capability of the client's personnel that are leading the project within a specific delivery type. So not everyone inside a client organization is equally capable of managing a progressive design build project.
Right.
Their skill set and maybe experience may be better suited to a CM at risk. And so based upon who is actually going to be running the project from the client's angle, in addition to some of the project factors, those two should decide what's the most realistic delivery method with the highest probability of success. So that's, in terms of selecting, that's a pretty low risk proposition for the client, assuming they have some experience in all the different delivery types. If it's their first progressive design build, right, and they're just learning what that word means, obviously there's risk in that inherently. Now, in terms of the impact on the project, the most important of the 3 decisions is the procurement in our research. The procurement has by far the biggest swing in probabilities of success of any aspect. We've done it. A lot of other folks have done it. There's some really good research out there, not ours, on what's the actual impact of delivery methods on project outcomes. And if you read everything, it basically says no one knows. It's hard. You can't really prove it, which means that things can go really well in every delivery method and then go really bad in every delivery method, right? There's not a lot of probability in terms of like, I have a much higher chance of success if I go a certain delivery method. Because if that were true, everyone would go towards that delivery method, right? So we kind of know just observationally, that's probably not true. There's no consistent delivery method that's outperforming all the rest. So delivery method really is just setting up opportunity. It's giving you angles and advantages and disadvantages for different ways to leverage capability and expertise in the industry to help the client manage the risk of the project, is how I think of it, right? So there's a project, it has things that are going to be hard to do, right? Risk, some things, there's different definitions of risk, but uncertain or challenging or, political, there's all different types of risk. Within that risk, the client, functionally owns all of it at the start, right? And now they're looking for a partner to help them manage the risk they already have. And some of the risks they don't even know they have, right? They may not even know it exists, but it's there. Whether you know it or not does not impact the existence of risk and problems, right? So then the next step is the procurement of like, okay, how am I going to select who's going to help me manage all the risk on this job? That's really the mindset I've kind of come to. So that selection of a partner or a selection of a vendor or a selection of an outsourced service becomes the key determinant of how much risk and how much chance of success you have will be no greater than the quality of your procurement. Because if you're going to hire a vendor who's going to send you a project team, right, with different people and different functional slots on that team, your ability to perform and execute at a high level will not exceed the capability of the people that vendor sends you, right? And if the client's people for a specific task are more capable than the vendor's people, then you have not outsourced that function. The client's now going to enter into a management and direction role and then actually tell the vendor what they want them to do. So now the vendor has no risk absorption, because you can't transfer risk if you're directing the work. So if a client says, go do this, the vendor says, yes, I will go do that, and it doesn't work, they have no risk. They'll actually get paid more if it doesn't work, because the client will give them more money to go back and fix it. So selection becomes the greatest impactor on your ability to have high performing outcomes. It impacts the probabilities around even having success. So how you run the procurement becomes the most important aspect of setting your job up for potential success within those three, right? The contract becomes how you, the best contract you can write is one you never open after you sign it, right?
Yep.
If you watch a project, we spend all this time on a contract, make everybody happy. If ideally, you'll never crack it open again. You only open it when there's problems.
Yep.
Right? I've never seen a super and a design guy and an engineer and a client person be sitting in a trailer, be like, let's get the contract out and figure out how we're supposed to manage this today. No, they're just taking care of business, right? And then if something does go wrong, they try to fix it. They don't even read the contract. They just try to fix it, right? Let's manage this, manage that. And if something bubbles up that they can't manage, they then have to decide if they're going to tell anyone else and when they tell them, right? They usually have to tell them when they can't manage it at the site level anymore. Then that's when the bosses find out. And we hear this all the time from that next layer of leadership that's not there every day at the site. How come I didn't hear about this sooner? That's all different conversation. But all of that is tied to your procurement, like who you selected and how you contracted it. Now, how you form that partnership and how you arrange the functionality of that project team is the most impactful of project outcomes, but that's not part of those three pieces. Right? That's a different piece that sits outside. So
you talk about those experience of the client as extremely important. Now, I'm going to throw it to you and say, all right, you are a new authority. You're a joint powers authority that's making up of 15 different agencies. You don't have any history of progressive or design build or anything, any kind of delivery method. If there's a very complex project or program that is very political, has a lot of utility, relocations, and all the things that make most sense to probably go collaborative delivery in a normal space, how would you set that up for success? Because it sounds like that there's a lot of challenges there if it's your first time out of the gate.
Yep. So with JPAs, and this is some of the things we help people with. So we're looking at it, and we've worked on all different sides, right? And so kind of the best way to think about my experience, my team's experience is like 20 plus years of mistakes, right? And just trying to figure out the right way to do things constantly. So there's a optimal way to do it, and then there's a political reality that you're constrained by in a JPA. So we can talk about optimal, but it's kind of irrelevant. You kind of have to operate within the situation as it is. Usually in a JPA, if there's a solar system, there's usually a sun that most of the other things orbit around, and there's a Jupiter, right? That's not quite as big as the sun, but it affects everyone else's orbit. So there's this big brother, little brother, cousins type, depends how many parties are involved. So that's usually the reality. So optimization within that becomes getting the most influential players collaborative internally first, right? And structuring that. And sometimes we just assume that's going to go okay, but that's a bad assumption. And we think a lot of those things that we may disagree on, we'll figure out in the contracting stage or how we're going to handle those or a decision matrix. But they ultimately rear their head on a job site or maybe in a design. By the time the design, they'll just kind of glaze over it and you'll try to solve it at the job site. So the more you can get the internal parties aligned and not have the most influential player overexert their influence, because they're usually the ones that lose structurally. They gain a lot, but they lose a lot in terms of their influence. That relationship, and it is a relationship, you can only write so much down, right? Because there's usually 2 to 5 people that kind of dictate a lot of these things, no matter the scale, that are kind of the places where most of things are settled.
Regardless of the size, you're saying?
It just seems like,
okay,
right? That's, I don't have math on that, but just
yeah, makes sense.
Like eventually you'll be in meetings like, well, we'll have to talk to this person about that, right? And you hear these same names over and over again, right? And then if it's too much of a bugaboo, then those 2 or 3 people will get together and have lunch, and then it comes back solved. And everyone's like, okay, that's what we're doing. So like, that's not a good way to manage things, but that just is how it is apparently currently. So now within that GAP, if they're collaborating, that's its own little, like, it's almost like a company, its own little organization, right? You watch how it forms, and they're trying to do everything, and there's all these, and it's long. A lot of times things, this is not like a 2-year thing, right? It could last forever in some of these cases. So then it's like people have career issues, right? They're trying to advance. There's all these human aspects to it beyond just like, let's get this thing done right. So it's just a normal organization, and you should treat it as such. A lot of the new wears off. A lot of that, honeymoon, momentum, Christmas type thing wears off after the first couple of years. But then after that, it's not so much the organization, because it's not really managing projects. Contractually, it kind of is, but it's the people. So you look, okay, who actually now is in the JPA, and what's their capability, right? So you do like either a capability or maturity assessment of the PM team, of the engineering team, whatever they have, and how are they set it up, right? And then based upon that, you would be like, okay, here's the projects, if there's just the project, here's the delivery methods that would work best. But looking at your team's experience, and even like what I'd recommend is you go in and look at their actual past performance on different delivery systems. So here's Bob, and he's run 3 CM at risk and 2 design builds the last 15 years. How'd they go? Like, well, that's pretty easy to figure out, right? And then you say, well, maybe we should go see if this is Bob's thing. CM at risk is the deferred preference based for his capability. The vendors will conform to whatever you ask, right? So you don't like to look at the market of what they're going to do. And then you look at the product itself and you say, is it worth the risk of having Bob be it, or switch Bob off, right? But those are all decisions that should be made. And in most organizations, we don't see them being even factored in, right? They're like, watching an organization select a delivery method can be, you don't even know when it happened. Sometimes it's not even documented. You're like, why'd you decide progressive design build? Like, oh yeah, we looked at it. And who's we? When? What were the factors? How much did you know about the project then versus now? And a lot of times it's easy to switch the delivery method. It depends how it's tied to the funding, but it's just 3 to 4 words on a page that you made up that you're going to see or run things a certain way. And then now it affects sequencing and it affects how you put these. So there's a point you can't do that. But yeah, so that's it. I would still look at the people that are going to be in the JPA, what their capabilities are, and drive it down to that project level. You can institutionalize delivery methods, but they are nothing more than another tool in the toolbox. Right. That's really all they are. They are not a hammer only works if you know how to swing it, right? And it only works for certain types of task. It's not good for everything. Okay. And it does matter who holds the hammer, right? And sometimes people confuse hammers with nail guns, right? In our industry. Yeah. And so those are all very critical. And that base reality you begin operating from and you make your assumptions from and your expectations from is just what everyone's going to operate off of moving forward. It becomes the foundation. So if your foundation's even just a little bit off, we've all seen this, right? You have a slight thing in the foundation. Once you stack 3 or 4 more layers of brick on top of that, it's pretty wobbly and it's pretty obvious it's not set up right. But nothing was wrong on the successive courses except they were put in a foundation that was just slightly off. So all of that upfront work, even though it feels like it's taking time and you're like, oh, we just want to get started or we're not making progress, we're falling behind, I think you're actually saving lots of time. because it's a exponential impact on the final outcome. And we've done some of this stuff. We had a big study with the GSA, and they let us run a bunch of projects. And we did it some where they had no upfront planning, no upfront like team building. Some where they let us do like a certain amount of days, and some where they let us do as much as we wanted. All the same people, all in the same region of the country, all the same basic types of projects, and we try to keep them about the same size. So it was like a 3-year thing we did. Yeah. And what we found was that if you planned versus not planned, like had all these things in place, took that time, it saved you like 7x in terms of actual schedule days. If you let the vendors and the client project people pick how long they wanted to coordinate before you forced them to get started on a project, it outperformed the regular plan by like 50% in terms of change order rate reduction, delay reductions. I mean, massive changes. So like, yeah, it did take you a little bit longer to do that collaboration up front and like take time to really do it right. And we have a process for that to actually facilitate that, because it's not obvious. You save so much on the back end, even though you feel like you're falling behind at the start. So all these things, the JPA and setting up, all things, a lot of that's just political and what they can and can't do, what people are okay with, whatever a few bosses are comfortable with. Take whatever you can get, and mainly just get as many options as possible. Just don't eliminate any options. Right. Like, don't say we're not going to do this. Just say, here we could do all of these. And then when it comes time for the project selection, things like that, you can start to deliver it and, you know, get some advice on the best way to do it. It's not hard. It just takes a little bit of coaching, right? Figuring out what's factors and knowing who your organization really is, not hoping who they might be, right? You got to accept that bit of reality. And not every 45-year-old project manager can equally do. They may have all the same amount of experience, but they are not all equally capable in every delivery system.
Okay. So you brought a couple of things I wanted to ask you on that. Is we keep hearing about the price and the phase 2, and I think there is a misnomer in progressive that the client is expecting some kind of cost savings in both phase 1 and phase 2. But what you're saying is you know, putting up some time and effort, a little extra time and effort up in phase 1 could bode very well in phase 2. So I think that's a very important thing, I believe, for a client to understand that. Because we've been doing some data and stuff as well, and sometimes that phase 1, even it might not be at the price that you anticipated, but phase 2's savings, because you're measuring twice and cutting once, that helps the overarching budget immensely.
Yeah, and you would do that collaboration phase 1 and at the start of phase 2, major activities. Yeah, the best ones we've been involved in, who actually like were willing to try stuff, they actually just kind of didn't do anything for a while in phase 2 to make sure it's not like, because sometimes like, well, we'll plan while we're working. I'm like, well, then there's a message with that, right? Versus, you know, we're going to stop and get this code aligned, and we call it points of departure. And we use it more on the IT side, the technology side, delivering, because they're a little bit more challenging sometimes. But if there's certain points where you know you don't know enough past it to make major planning decisions, then you just plan up to that point of departure, and then you stop again. Right? It could just be for a day, but you reorient, collaborate, resequence, because people change too. You're constantly losing people in the current market, right? They cycle out, in and out. So phase 1, we've done some, research around that structure. It's not always called progressive design build, but that idea of like doing this work up front and then doing the construction activities on the back end. And this is my personal opinion on the things I've seen and some of the data we have. I don't have a lot of data. I can't prove this data-wise. I just have enough to kind of make me think I'm right. Cost shouldn't even be considered on phase 1. It's the relative amount of savings you're going to potentially extract from doing phase 1 the right way is so much greater on phase 2 when you actually have 300 people working 10 hours a day, right? Phase 1 done right is worth every penny. No.
I'm gonna make a poster or wear a shirt that has that on my.
I mean, it's easy to say where I sit. I'm like, spend the money, right? But because we're always so one of the greatest challenges in these delivery methods, alternative delivery methods, especially for an organization who's trying a new one. So as I said, they're new to progressive design. There's usually a few believers who are like, guys, we should do this. Guys, we should do this, right? So they're kind of sticking their neck out politically, especially if it's like a government organization. It's super bureaucratic, super political, right? And then they don't forget anything. Everyone works there their whole career, right? It's like a hybrid family with all these cousins and brothers and sisters, right? And there's like a mom and dads, and it's complex, right? So these people, they're pushing this, trying to do the right thing for the organization, sticking their necks out. There's risk with that. There's real career, political risk. And you have to kind of appreciate that. So yeah, as you're moving into these delivery methods, just this idea of like, well, let's not oversell what this can do. Let's do it the right way. And there's just so much savings if you give yourself a chance to do it the right, but it's not automatic. It's not automatic.
Well, and you bring up a good point though, because I keep hearing this hybrid, and then right when they say hybrid and you start digging through it, it's a Frankenstein piece, and it's very scary.
We're in the middle of a study right now on progressive design build, and so I was looking at it this morning just so in case this came up. So far in the data we collected, about 20, and we just did industry-wide, clients, designers, owners, or contractors. So just everyone could touch. 20% never heard of it, right? PDB, never heard of it. 80% heard of it. As you dig into like who's actually like knows more about it, there are a lot of different ideas of what it means and doesn't mean, speaking specifically, but even design build, it kind of depends on the industry. So if you're in transportation, that means something totally different in transportation than it does in commercial, right? So all those become critical factors. Yeah, the cost piece, very challenging in today's market, and phase one cost should not be a major deciding factor. It has no correlation to phase two cost, except negative. So the more you spend on phase one, the less you'll spend on phase two.
Got it. So speaking of phase one and phase two, have you seen anything, and maybe you haven't, but have you seen any data of off-ramping and what that ended up costing the client after the fact of hiring a new contractor or team?
It doesn't happen a lot, right? Holistically, right? You're not doing that. It seems to be happening more. I know we chatted earlier too. You're seeing that as well, but that's anecdotal. Like I don't really know if that's true or not. I feel that it's happening. I've seen it enough. The data we do have, we have had a few off ramping in our data set because we've been on over 3,500 projects, and we've touched. We're real close to 20 billion now. So we've been on a lot of jobs, research, advising, whatnot. Every time they've off-ramped, all the ones we have, I did a paper on this years ago. Every time they decided not to move forward and then do something else, it was significantly more expensive than they thought. They were always better off not doing that. So for what it's worth, if you're still going to build the thing anyway, the off-ramp is almost guaranteeing you more expense, more headache, more frustration.
More time.
Definitely more time. Yeah. And you'll see people depart. So you'll see this career removal, right? I was presenting at I won't say their organization's name. I was presenting at a professional organization one time. And I was it was like a regional thing. And I was like the session for that, like one day event. I was the guy. And then to the end, I'm sitting there, I was just chatting, and they are announcing the next regional event in like 6 months or whatever. And the topic was how to not let a bad project impact your resume. Right. And I'm like, that's really smart. Like they should teach people how to do that. Because so you see that where like things start going south, some of these people that are involved up front, they start peeling back. You really put in lower, less experienced people who are, it's called an opportunity to them. And now it's even more likely to have problems, right? So you have this multiplying effect of, things going worse than you thought because of the off-ramping, right? Not just the cost impacts, but all the political impacts, personnel impacts that ripple through that.
I appreciate it. I would have assumed that, but I'm glad. I mean, you're living it every day. So yeah, it's good to hear that.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to touch base with you, kind of dig into the professor aspect of it. Every time on these podcasts, one of the big challenges, especially in our industry, it's not as looked at as revered as some, like maybe a technology or a Google or an Amazon or whatnot. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the next generation? I mean, we were just talking about, finding the right person with the right background and delivery method and placing them. But how do we help the next generation, the next ones up, get that experience? And what are you seeing with regards to construction? Because it's always a topic of conversation with our competitors or our counterparts and stuff like that. It's always on the front of mind.
So the rising generation.
Mm-hmm.
I'll level set. So people sometimes forget what a millennial is. A millennial was born between either 1978 and 1980 up until about 95.
Mm.
So millennials are like 40 years old now.
Yep.
Mid 30s to 40s. So we're not talking millennials. So you go past millennials, you're in the Zoomers. So Gen Y millennials are the same thing. Gen Z, Zoomers. So they're the next younger ones. So they're already in the workforce. They're your 20-year-olds. Millennials are the least productive generation in the history of the United States, up until the Zoomers. And so you're seeing this decrease in just, this is national, right? All industry, not just construction. So why is that, right? Are we just worse people? Which I don't think is true. So what's causing all this? And then you look at like specifically into the construction and design markets, who's coming into that. There is I've been a professor, this is my 20th year, and I was teaching before that. So I've been in it for over 2 decades, and there has been a thinning of quality, just significantly, in terms of your average person walking into an engineering college in the built environment, right? So you're talking civil engineering, construction management, that I want to build stuff, design stuff that has to do with changing the way the planet looks, right? The numbers are up holistically, but there's a downward trend recently overall. The average, you're having these tech fields that are much more attractive, higher salaries, more comfortable work arrangements,
right,
better benefits. You see this natural migration of the best talent into the most compensated fields.
Right.
And the compensation for this field has not kept up in terms of total value. I mean, even in the last crash, we were like, prior to 2007, 8, 9, 10, I did a whole study post-crash on what things changed. And we had like 700 companies participate. And it was really interesting. But, I grew up, my dad was in the industry. I grew up in a construction family my whole life, in highway, in bridges, and major earthworks. And that's where my background is. My dad owned a business as well for a while, before he retired. And he got a big bonus every year, end of the year, right? And that was everyone in the company got a Christmas bonus. And that doesn't exist anymore. It's a smaller percentage of people get that, if they get it, right? And so, he and I were talking a little while ago, and, he would make 50, 100, 120% of his salary in one paycheck, right? And that was, you had a base salary, and you worked as hard as you could, and you got a piece of the action at the end if you had a good year, right? And most of these companies are family owned, right? There's not that many there's not many construction companies, relatively speaking, the total number of construction companies that are, being traded with stocks on Wall Street. There's not that many. So you got a piece of the action. And so that was completely changed on the Great Recession. So that aspect that maintained a pretty high level of interest in the industry, and you saw this generational movement into it, where like, my dad or my mom was in this, so I'm going to be in this, right? Whether or not they own the company or not. There was this, you saw a lot more people, and we saw this in our program, like, it used to be like 70% of our students, their parents were in the industry. Not true anymore, right? So you had that generational knowledge. It's just implicit in how you live your life, right? You're just used to moving, you're used to your parents being away, you're used to doing this, stressful nights, working on weekends, it's just normal, right? And now you have option for that. You don't have to do that. You can work from home, put in 35, 40, make more money, better benefits. Why would you go work 78 hours a week, have to yell at someone to do their job right because they messed something up, and hope you don't kill anyone, right?
Yeah.
Didn't take long to figure out that's probably not the most attractive field. If I can do something else, if I'm smart enough to do something else, why wouldn't I?
What about legacy? I always talk about legacy. I always said my family owns a construction company in Chicago. So I grew up and my dad loved going around the city of Chicago talking about that building and that building being a part of that. And I love that. I love that. And I feel like I have that kind of and part of the reason why I'm in this industry. But do you not see that as much in the upcoming generations?
It's been lost. There's other things, it's not just, professional life that's changed, right? So all that I think plays into it. The ability to, so you look at most companies, on a day-to-day basis, they're not trying to save the industry. Right? You just got to look out for yourself, right? Saving the whales is part of the professional organizations. Maybe a few of the larger companies have been, you may have, industry influence, but your average construction company, average client doesn't. They're not going to move the needle at all on a national level or even a regional, maybe regional, that's what they are. So it's more about how do I optimize my ability to attract and retain top talent, right? That becomes, a key differentiator of the company of the future, and the construction company of the future. And then clients need a way to incorporate that reality into their procurement model. Because if you're not getting advantageous selection points in some mechanism to the companies that have the better and more capable people, and not just experience, there's raw intelligence capability out there. Not everyone's equally capable of processing information, communicating. Those are different skills that are hard to measure.
That's tough though, Ken, because I don't want you to get off that mark, because I want you to dive in a little bit in that if you can. But it's very difficult in today's procurement and evaluation to narrate that aspect that you're talking about. It's very easy to be a box checking exercise. Do you have 20 years of similar experience? Do you have three to five projects that look and feel the same way? And all of those elements. And so then we tend to see the same individuals showing up to every single project in pursuit. And that's part of where I want to go is just, how do we elevate? How do we get the next step up to, how do the deputies become project managers and the task leads get to be deputies?
Yeah. So there's two aspects of that. One is the internal mechanisms inside a company to provide those opportunities. And the second is within the procurement process, how the client facilitates that in their exploration of what's best for the project. A lot of times it needs to be, we will see in the procurement space where they don't right size the qualifications to the project itself, right? So everyone wants, you can see it up and down the procurement, because the worst thing in procurement is the keyboard where they go Control C, Control V, right? Copy paste.
Yes.
It should be illegal to copy paste in procurement. Now, to an extent, right? There's some things that don't change much. But every project should be thought of individually on the best criteria and the most appropriate qualifications. So if every client wants the absolute best person in the world, most qualified for every single project, well, then you're going to get what you have right now, which is completely unpredictable, right? Frustrations, bait and switch. There will be a senior, 25-year experienced PM who touches it twice the whole duration of the job. You only see them when there's real big problems, if there's big problems, right? And that entire reality we live in, I personally believe, was completely created by the clients and how they set up their procurement process and how they made the vendors play the game, right? Because the vendors will, whatever you tell us the game is as a vendor, if I'm a vendor, you say, here's how we're going to score you. Oh, okay, that's the game. I will compete within the rules of the game, right? As soon as you change the rules, I conform, because I don't want to, if I break the rules, I get penalized or disqualified, right? And so most of the frustrations the clients are seeing was self-induced pain over the last 30 years. And a lot of it happened in the last 15 years. So
Why 15 years?
the market shifted after the last crash. There was a lot of behavioral shift. You saw a delay of the retirement rate of the boomers. So the boomers have delayed their retirement. This is going to have a massive impact the next 10 years. So the average baby boomer generation, which is the most productive generation in the history of the planet, they've generated more wealth than any generation in the history of the planet. There's going to be a lot of consequences for that the next 15 years. Your average boomer turned 65 last year. So the midpoint of the boomer distribution curve was 2022, 65. So now all that front end on that the tip of that could have retired 10, 15 years ago, but they didn't because there was a downturn. So they stayed in the market. So they have propped up this evolutionary shift that has to occur into your question of how do we advance people. They have filled in the gaps of some of the deficiencies that we're going to have to deal with moving forward because of all the things that have happened in the construction market, the technology space, demographically. There's lots of things that have happened all concurrently. The true reality of what we're going to be living in will start to sit in really hard the next 5 years. And it's not going to be so much about how do we fix it. It's going to be about how do you optimize your position within this new environment, is my personal belief. Because just based on all the data, what's going to happen, where it's all going. So the opportunities that are going to be created for these younger personnel, if you have alignment between a client who's willing to work with their most common vendors they procure to, right? Because if you're an agency and you're buying roads and bridges, there's a certain group you're signing prime contracts with, and then there's a secondary group that hires through your contract into that prime group, right? And that's on engineering and construction side. So if those agencies that are forward-looking would collaborate structurally, not on a project level, but structurally, right, with their primary service providers on engineering, design, construction, and they would look at that workforce problem regionally. And that's about the best thing. Nationally, it gets very complex, but regionally, you could probably manage that.
Have you ever seen a collaboration between that?
I've seen some of the aspects of it in certain areas. It just takes one believer, visionary, risk taker of appropriate authority in a large agency.
Because it has to be driven by the owner.
It has to be by the owner. Because the vendors, they can do it, but they may not get any benefits from it. And the replication of it is easy. Like one of the hardest things in our industry, it's so easy to copy what other people are doing without putting any of the R&D into it, right? So all the benefits, none of the risk. So the agency, owner, whatever it is, client, customer, needs to facilitate that to have it be real, in my opinion. And then if you coordinate that, I mean, these are things we help do, but like, what can we actually do structurally? It's not just about going to high schools, right? And, hitting college campuses. And that's not what I'm talking about. Right. It's got to be across the industry. Like we've gotten heavy into, so I was on a large study with a large national research organization. And we discovered this like 9 years ago, the demographic issue. And we were looking at succession within the project manager function. And we got data from 6 very large companies in the industry, and they dumped us their HR data. And we learned a lot of things. I won't go to all of it, but we learned like, wow, this is a big problem because all these people are all your people running the majority. If you think about company structured, that 55 to 65-year-old person is the company. It's the culture. They're the de facto mentors. They are the tacit knowledge pool. They are the keepers of the processes and the rules. And they fill all in the gaps, right? So now you're going to have a rapid reduction in that group this next 10, 15 years. And then they'll be gone totally. This is the next biggest risk. There's a lot of things happening simultaneously, but the next biggest risk we've just starting to taste. I have anecdotes of this, but there's not enough data to show it occurring. The boomers generated over $70 trillion of wealth. That wealth is going to transfer to young Gen Xers and old millennials. through inheritance. Okay. So across this next 15 years, you're going to see earlier retirement of young 50-year-olds who you thought you were going to get another 15 years out of, but because of the wealth transfer, no longer need to work. So now you're going to lose another 30% of your most productive people at a faster rate over this next 10 years, 15 years. If you're not prepared for that now, because you will only be able to change that outcome the next 5 years. If you wait too long, you'll be in the same boat as everyone else, and you'll be trying to like fix it, but there'll be no way to fix it. So you can strategize right now to do that.
So is this a huge opportunity for the 30-year-olds that are
Huge opportunity. Right? The opportunity, and for the companies that figure this out fastest.
Yeah.
Right. I've been doing a lot of time where I'm trying to help. Like, if you'll listen, I'll help you, because like we've been mapping people. We've gotten into psychology. There's all different aspects to this that get complex, but it's the biggest opportunity in terms of like positioning yourself for the next 50 years as an organization. But from an individual like 30-year-old, so the 30-year-old in 10 years is the 20-year-old now. They're like in my class, right? Yeah. Coming out. If they position themselves correctly, and one of the things that look at is look up, right? If you look up and your immediate supervisor is 3 years older than you, and their immediate supervisor is 2 years older than them, I advise my students, leave immediately. Right? You want your immediate supervisor to be 15 years older than you, and their supervisor to be 10 years older than them. And if that's the slot you're in a company, and like a company like yours, I mean, you have so many slots, right? Now, a lot of times you're hiring en masse for one senior position 10 years from now, 7 years from now, right? So there's like 100 to 1 or 50 to 1. So, there's this survival. Well, if that one for these 50 is just 3 years older, where they used to be 20 years older,
right?
And you had a whole, like a large company like yours, there's a whole career path, like subculture, expectation. It may not be written down, but it just exists, and everyone conforms.
Do you see that? Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point.
And that's all got to go away.
Do you see that shifting even with some strong cultured, long historical companies in how that linear path happens? Are you going to see that shifting with these younger generations?
So what I think will happen, again, this is totally made up, right? This is my personal opinion. I don't have any data for this. What I think will happen is you will see long historical companies go out of business in the next 15 years because they will not have anticipated this shift. They would have tried to maintain their standard traditional way of internal resource management, human resource management. And it's going to bite them because they will be forced to put a 30-year-old in a position that's usually occupied by a 55-year-old, expect the same level of productivity, output, capability, and experience, put them in positions where they will fail at a much higher rate. It's going to cost the company too much money. And by the time you realize it, you'll be so deep negative that then you will start doing crazy things like taking work you usually wouldn't take, expanding in places because you just try to keep it going, and then your chance of failure after that's just off the charts. Right. So I think what's going to happen is there becomes it figured out, and they're gonna expand significantly and eat up more market share versus their traditional competitors who don't figure it out, and they try to keep doing what they've been doing, and they wait too long to change, and they are going to become either significantly different or won't exist, or they'll get eaten up. Right. They'll get consolidated.
It's fascinating.
That's why I think it's going to happen. I mean, you can just look at, there's no way to fix it, right? There's no more babies coming, right? And if there were, they're going to take 30 years before it matters, right? So it's already etched in stone. It's already going to happen. It's been delayed because of the last crisis, because the boomers worked longer. They've worked longer and longer and longer, right? They worked into their late 60s. There's some in their 70s. You still see them, right? And, healthcare is improved. Like, we can say all the things that could happen, right? Oh, technology and all that sort of stuff. But, technology, like, people are like relying upon that, but it's not here yet. And the problem's here. So if we think technology is going to be that much more different in 5 years, maybe AI will save us, or robots. I mean, I've heard robots for 10 years. Yeah. Right. So, we'll see what happens, but I think that's going to be a major monumental shift in the vendor arena. The agencies, they'll kind of always exist. They're already have shrunk so much relatively to where they should be. A lot of them.
So Albert, selfish for me as forever daughter dad. Yeah. 3 young girls coming up. How do you see any changes, and how do you see it with the female
like what I tell my kids, right? So I have kids, 14 and just turned 5 a couple weeks ago. Our baby, not a baby anymore, we still. And so I've told my older kids that the world they will be in when they're my age will be just fundamentally different than what I grew up in. It's going to be, the economy is going to have to be fundamentally different. The basic consumption, Western capital version of capitalism we have is based upon a growing demographic, right? And so we don't look like that anymore. The U.S. is actually pretty much in the best shape of any modern Western first world kind of country.
What do you mean by shape?
In terms of demographically.
Okay.
And demographics mean the distribution of our population by age and gender. So that model typically has consumption being highest in your late 20s, early 30s, and your early 40s. You're buying your houses, your cars, your diapers. You get into 40s, 50s, you're sending kids to college. And so you have this massive spend-based consumption off of capital. The capital is being provided by the older people who are not consuming. They're retiring. They're trying to live off of that. So now we have more older people, less younger people, so now there's no consumption, right? And we've just passed the threshold, right? And so the current economic model it will be disrupted significantly. So look at my kids, I'm like, it's going to be I don't know what's going to be. I've got some ideas. You can see what some people think it should be, right? Which there's different fear and potential. I don't get political, but like there's different things. There's different options that have been tried. And it's going to happen on a larger scale globally. But it will be a different world by the time they're my age. So if you fast forward my 14-year-old and you push him forward 25 years, there's going to be less of them. It's going to be more competitive. And the same things that got me to where I am will almost highly likely will have no value beyond being a good person, high ethics, high morals, kindness. Those types of things will still have, I think those attributes will have more value in the future world versus what they look like now. But some of the skill sets and things like that, 8th grade, we found our 8th grader, 13, 14, writing a book with AI, a novel, and like a good book, multiple chapters. Didn't know he was doing it. Like I introduced him to AI. I've been, even before ChatGPT came out, I was using certain things. I'm like, this is going to be huge. And I saw him, and then I signed him up for ChatGPT, got him interested, and then, he has a lot more free time than I do, so he's been playing with it. And that's one of the things he started doing. So like, it's way beyond the capability of an 8th grader. It's actually a pretty decent book. Like, and if you know him, it's a great book, right? Like that's the author, right? He's really smart, but like he's still an 8th grader. And so it's going to be different, different world. So I'm trying to get them to focus on, don't just follow, because I followed my dad in a lot of ways. He also nudged me into academia. He's like, it's a great, and he was right. It's been great. But yeah, and then he followed his dad, right? And there's a lot, I think it's going to be a lot different. So for your daughters, I would, they're going to have to be younger when they discover what they want to do. They can't wait till they're 20. They can't wait till they're 25, right? This whole discover yourself thing that's happened the last 20 years. So I'm pushing them like the sooner you realize what you want to do, like I'm not going to wait till college before I start helping you be ready for your career. You want to invest? Let's find a way. You want to start a business? Let's find a way. I don't care if you're 17 years old. Let's do it. Right now, I'd still like them to go to college. Right? Obviously, I'm highly biased. But I think there's still some value, at least the next 40, 50 years in that. And I think some universities will adapt and some won't. And you're already seeing that. So there'll still be a place for higher education. That won't go away, especially in certain fields like medicine and engineering, things like that. But yeah, it's going to be a lot different. So for your daughters, it'd be, just don't assume it's going to be same old, same old. Maybe it will be. I'm wrong a lot.
No, I think you're right.
But yeah, that's for your daughters. What I would say is earlier the better, quicker, look for opportunities, and they're smart. Like we talk about them being less productive, these generations, but they're also smarter. in a lot of ways. And their ability to absorb, filter, and act upon massive amounts of information is unlike any generation in history, right? So like I have students and my colleagues look at our students, we have these programs like, oh man, this student's this, student's that, right? And there's different, the challenges are different than they were 15 years ago. Most generations are 15-year blocks. I've been training people at generations of 3-year block. Things are changing so fast and technology is changing so quickly. To block things in 15-year increments is how we typically do a generation. I think that's probably a big fallacy. And I was talking to a group of managers, and they're like, they're complaining about, and they all call them millennials. I'm like, they're not millennials, right? You're almost a millennial, right? But they, I'll call them the millennials just means someone younger than you. That's what the words come to mean. But I'm like, you're treating them like you're trying to understand them as some form of human. They're not. They're a different species. Think of them as a different species and then try to work with them. And one guy's like, that's it. They are a different species. He's like, I've been trying to think of them as like, are they more like this person? I'm like, no, they're not like anyone you know. They're a different species. And I think in a lot of wonderful ways. Obviously, there's things that we don't like, but like the vast majority, amazing. Like I'm so optimistic for the future in whole, but it's going to change fast. And there's going to be some people who are doing things now that take full advantage of all the opportunities. I'm talking corporations and companies and agencies and all these things, even in construction. And there's some that are not going to figure out until it punches them in the nose. And it'll be way too late. You're not going to have the runway you would have had 20 years ago when technology took, oh, the fax machine. Oh my goodness, the fax machine, right? You had time to conform. You won't have it. And because you're going to lose your people so fast, you have demographics changing, technology changing, culture changing, financial structures and capital markets are going to be changing. And so there's going to be this massive split. Right. And so if you're on the good side of the split, it's going to be super exciting. You're on the bad side, you're trying to fight for their traditions.
When I was in as a school, it was who moved my cheese?
Yeah.
MR skipper.
Yeah. And so, I think it's going to happen quick. And there's all, there's all the geopolitical stuff all happening, and that's also indicative of our economic times. But yeah, it's pretty neat. So. That's awesome. Sorry, we're way off topic, but
No, it's good.
Well, Ken, I just want to say thank you so much. I hope you all learned as much as I did. And sorry if we went really long, because I can talk to Ken for hours. So I really appreciate it. And what I was saying with other guests is that we'd like to really have you come back in 6-9 months and kind of talk through some new stuff and kind of revert back to and say, are things going the same way as the last time we talked? And so I just want to say thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.